so attracted to the idea of the symphony, in that you can do everything. You can. I know Mahler said that the whole world was in the symphony. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure I'd go quite so far as that for what I've done, but that you can actually emotionally go from all sorts of states, expression. I think that's also one of the problems I found with when I tried to be modern, is that I found that if I wrote in an extremely non-tonal way, mm-hmm. if such a thing actually exists, I couldn't express emotions quite as clearly. I could express it kind of real kind of angst and misery, which is why some of those famous film scores, I mean, you think of Psycho, mm-hmm. was a 12-tone score, where 12-tone composition, but I was determined to make, because I was fascinated by the kind of fluidity you got in chromatic shapes.
From using 12-tone
From using 12-tone.
Yeah.
So I decided I actually wanted to incorporate it. And I can't remember the first piece I used my own version, but I've been working through, rather like an artist with a palette of colours. An artist isn't just going to say, well, I'm not having that cadmium red and I'm not having that blue because, it doesn't fit the system. Mm-hmm. This is my palette and this is what I'm going to use. So I wouldn't say determined. No, I wasn't determined. I was just curious, and somehow it was natural. When Schoenberg goes on about how his 12-tone system isn't intellectual, mm-hmm. for him,
yeah.
That I compose in the same way I've always composed. I just happen to be composing with 12 tones, and people said, "Oh no, you've obviously got your matrix, and it's all just mathematics." Mm-hmm. But I found a way. And as you noticed, of course you noticed, mm-hmm. in the Third Symphony, a way of combining all these elements. So in a way, I feel that I'm like an artist who's got an absolutely huge palette of colours, mm-hmm. and I want to use all of them. And why not use all of them?
Well, I think there's something in your experience as a player too that means that when you're using a technique like the 12-tone approach, that it still, the music has that sense of physicality and gesture that makes it satisfying to play. The melodies still have direction and shape and purpose, and there's nothing arid about it at all.
Very kind of you to say so.
So you had the performance of the symphonic music for brass and strings around 2000 in Grand Rapids. That was the first time you'd heard one of your big pieces played by a professional orchestra.
Yeah. I had conducted it at the Guildhall as a student. I wasn't allowed to use the Guildhall Symphony Orchestra, but there was a ex-principal clarinet of the Israeli Phil, wonderful man, quite scary man actually, Yona Ettlinger, who'd come to study conducting at the Guildhall, and he ran what was called the Friday Orchestra, and guess what? It took place on a Friday. And when he heard that I'd written this piece and that I couldn't get it played, he said, "You can borrow the Friday Orchestra."
Bless him.
Yeah.
What a guy.
And that was, Rubra, I didn't know at the time, but was standing in the doorway listening to the whole thing.
Amazing.
Which was rather nice.
It's a good lesson for all young musicians. You never know who's listening in life or who's in the orchestra. And from there then, more work for David in Grand Rapids, yes?
Yes. Yeah. Well, in fact, David is remarkable as a guest conductor. I mean, one of his sort of reputations in America is for, going around and, I mean, it's horrible to say kind of second-tier orchestras, but I mean, obviously not Boston, not Chicago, not New York, but always very good.
Yeah.
I have to say that, of course, the standard is excellent, but he goes and guests, and he took the symphonic music all over the place, which was very nice. and that's how commissions started to come in.
Yeah.
So gradually it kind of, built up from there. And also having someone who's enthusiastic about what you do and hearing stuff come back, obviously it encourages you to do more.
Especially if you've kind of come of age at a time when no one was showing any interest in the kind of stuff that you were writing.
Yes, it's probably a long time to wait, but I mean it's better that it's happened than not happen.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
And you were saying about my own practical experience of playing. I think one of the things that I really try and do, and I think I just do it naturally, is when I'm writing, it doesn't matter what instrument I'm writing for, I like to write idiomatically for the instrument. I cannot understand composers who deliberately try and antagonise their players by writing things that are completely impossible or so difficult to play. And obviously there's a little bit of sleight of hand sometimes, because I've taken part in contemporary performances where I know what the composer's written isn't exactly what's being played, and no one seems to be much the wiser. But the other thing is I don't like to write music, even if I'm writing in this kind of my own adapted kind of mix of 12-tone or whatever styles. I don't like to write music that I can't hear. So that I can't say, sorry, second bassoon, that's a B flat.
Yeah. You mean the notes actually matter?
They actually matter. I think, again, going back to David Lockington, he said, in a funny way, he said, you're like Bach. I said, steady on. I said, it's a bit of an accolade.
Yeah.
He said, well, you know how Bach can be played on all sorts of different combinations because the notes are really important. He said, I've noticed that with your pieces, that the notes are important.
I think we've even talked about this once before in terms of your approach to orchestration, which is get the notes right, and the orchestration is much less problematic.
Yes.
If you need to put all the color in the instrumentation because the harmony has no color, it's much more unforgiving.
Yes, I think it's what Schoenberg referred to as lacquer.
Yeah.
He said that the composer who's not really kind of making a coherent piece uses lacquer to cover up their paucity of invention or something. I can't remember. But as you know, I've been rereading Style and Idea, and it's fascinating, absolutely fascinating. And he was beset with exactly the same problems. I mean, I think another fascinating thing is to feel this great community. I mean, right, we all have this community of musicians, fellow musicians. I mean, the genuine musicians, not the sort that, was it Frank Zappa said he wouldn't know a dominant seventh if it bit him on the arse. And I have unfortunately sat with players like that.
Yeah.
I remember an experience in the LSO playing Mahler 5, and I was so excited, playing Mahler 5, and all my elderly desk partner said to me was, shocking second fiddle parts, aren't they? And I thought, oh dear, is that with,
Is that what it's come to?
Is that what it's come to? And I had a colleague in the Opera House Orchestra who was in the first fiddles. I was being a little bit less than complimentary about early Verdi operas. And he said, well, of course you don't like them, Philip. He said, because your section never get the tunes. And I said to this chap, I won't mention his name, but I said, do you really think my musicianship is of such a standard that I only judge a piece of music by what the second violins are doing?
Some do.
Yes.
Some do.
Yeah. But it's a great thrill for me whenever a piece is performed where the musicians enjoy it and they thank you for writing it, or they say, complimentary things about it. For me, I suppose that's probably even more important than what the public think of it. To have the approbation of your peers, I think is tremendously important.
Let's talk a little bit about your first symphony and how that came to be. That was David's idea, wasn't it?
It was the 75th anniversary of the founding of the Grand Rapids Symphony Orchestra, and so they commissioned, a symphony from me, And that was, I think that was obviously a bit of a turning point, because I'd always thought that I could handle, large scale form, and I suppose so much of the repertoire that I was in love with and had probably internalized, the great symphonies of the past. It was almost like, it was just like breathing or talking.
Yeah.
In fact, I often tell students that, it's writing music. You're having a musical discussion, with yourself or with the different ideas. But in a sense, it is a little bit like a discussion. There is some kind of analogy to it. Interestingly, going back to the earlier piece, there was a rather formidable first trumpet player in the orchestra, who I was told, was not necessarily the most friendly to contemporary composers. And this chap did actually come up to me and looking very serious, and he said, I won't do the American accent, I'll spare you that. but he said, Mr. Sawyers, he said, we sometimes have to play this contemporary music, and quite frankly, most of it stinks. And he said it with that, that real, and I thought, oh my God, what's coming now? And he said, he almost smiled, he said, but we really like playing your piece, and thank you for writing such a lyrical trumpet part, and walked away. And when I told David this, he was absolutely amazed.
Yeah.
God, he said, that's
it's quite a brave thing to do.
Praise indeed.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So the the first symphony, it was great. So good to get a performance that is so well prepared, so well played. And again, David, like your dear self, was somebody who just gets what I do. It's like a kindred spirit, really. I don't want to get too kind of airy-fairy or philosophical about it, but there is some kind of, real kind of soul tie-up. There's something special, some kind of special magic that exists. Like Delius and Beecham, there's something that where people get what someone else does.
Well, I know from the performer's point of view, when you find music that you really, really believe in, it becomes, it's a joy, but it's also, you feel like it's, shit, I've got to get this right, because, I'm very lucky to be the one who's doing this piece for the first time, and I know it's great, and I've got to, give it everything I've got, and it's a wonderful challenge and so satisfying. The first symphony is a 4-movement piece with a Tchaikovsky-sized orchestra. Yep. How long did it take to compose?
I'm never quite sure about how long these things take to write, because this little black book, not a little red book, a little black book, is something I carry with me sort of all the time, and it's just full of my little jottings and scribblings, and as an idea occurs to me, I write it down. So when I knew that this commission, became definite, I looked in here, well, not this particular, this is, I think this is about the 3rd, 4th or 5th book. I looked in there for various ideas, and then I think starting is the difficult thing.
Yeah.
I think you've written pieces yourself. You just have to take that plunge, and as you've noticed from the sketches we were looking at the other day of the 3rd symphony, how the beginning, the first sketch, it's embryonic, but it isn't how it ended up. There are elements of it. Yeah. And I think that's so, and I like to get a lot on paper before I go to the computer, because I find, although I can work on Sibelius, I think it's a very useful tool, and it's great to be able to hear stuff back, because obviously in the old days I used to try and play everything on the piano, and one just doesn't have enough fingers. Yeah. But I think you have to get a good chunk going, because as you were talking about sense of direction and stuff in music, if you don't capture that initial idea or that impulse, if you're sitting at the computer, by the time you've inputted whatever it is, that kind of impetus has gone.
Yeah.
And I have a kind of even silly shorthand way if an idea will occur in real time.
Yeah.
And of course, if it's fast, you can't write that fast. But I've got my own kind of hieroglyphics,
Yeah.
and I know what it means. I don't think anybody else would.
Wait until someone tries to complete your unfinished works after you're gone.
Well, if that happens, here's a little tip. If it goes up, the pitch goes up, if it goes down. Sorry, it's a...
But I do think it's something to be said, I know from my own much more limited experience as a composer, of just allowing yourself space to sort of daydream the music and if you're going straight to try and make everything the specific and the final too early in the process, then it kind of can grind to a halt because you're thinking only about the next note. And I can think of,
Yes, I kind of have referred to it as the crossword puzzle mentality. When you're trying to do cryptic crosswords, and a clue just doesn't, you look at it and you think about it, doesn't make sense. You go to sleep, something happens unconsciously, goodness knows what, but thank goodness it does, and the next morning you've got it. And it's the same with, for me, with composition. There has to be a gestation period. Doesn't matter how long it is or how short it is, but then when it's kind of got there, I can work very quickly. There are parts of that first symphony that I wrote, in hours.
Yeah.
Whole chunks of it, but getting to that point may have taken a month, may have taken 2 months.
Now, do you write in full score or short score once you get going, or do you write sort of, 4-stage short score and then orchestrate it, or do you conceive the piece orchestrally?
No,
from the beginning?
I've never been a kind of write it as a piano piece kind of person. So that the sketches will either be single line, or they might be some more lines. There are some sketches in here where there are 4 parts together, and I leave myself little instructions about what to do. But when it comes to inputting it on Sibelius, I can usually put more or less the whole thing in. So I was allowed the luxury of extra percussion actually in the first symphony. So I had bells, I had suspended cymbals, and I had glockenspiel, which you remember my glockenspiel part in the Gale of Life overture, which you very kindly did.
Done it a couple times now.
Yeah.
It's great fun.
Yeah. But I'm not good at sort of effect without cause. I can't kind of colour stuff up. I don't sort of chuck. I'm not one of these people who's tempted to write it for a whole array of percussion instruments.
Yeah.
Because somehow, it will suit some composers brilliantly.
Yeah.
But it doesn't suit me, and I think we all have our different strengths and weaknesses. And I suppose it's because although there is quite a lot of tuned percussion, there's a lot that isn't tuned, and for me, notes being so important and harmony being so important, I suppose, for me a cymbal clash is rather traditional. It's to kind of announce a climax or something. It's not just for a coloristic purpose.
It has a structural purpose.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. I think that comes across very strongly. The first symphony sort of climaxes with a chorale. You're thinking back to the early reactions to music, in the late 60s, early 70s, the whole idea of that kind of stuff was verboten. Does it feel a little bit like to do something that is really straight back to Bruckner, Brahms, and Beethoven in a way?
Yes, I suppose in all sorts of art forms, you know, the pendulum swings, and of course, the extreme avant-garde. It's fantastic that it happens, because otherwise things wouldn't move on.
Yeah, absolutely.
But like in the classical period, there are so many classical composers we don't know about anymore,
Yeah.
because they were fairly mediocre, and the same thing's going to happen. With all the composers today, there'll be composers who their real worth, if there is an intrinsic worth in what they've done, which will become obvious. Going back to what I said about Stravinsky saying that the best composers steal, the very end of Brahms' Second Symphony, as you know, that the wonderful and then that wonderful trombone chord.
Yeah.
D, F sharp A, right up there like this
Yeah.
great ball of fire,
Yeah.
just standing there. End of my first symphony.
Yeah.
Have a look at it, trombones, D, F sharp A, exactly the same layout. So, you know, but people don't go, oh, Brahms' Second Symphony, you know. I mean, I know, but then that's, you know, it's a bit of orchestration, you know, works, you know, the combination and the range for the instruments is just perfect for a setting like that.
Absolutely.
So I suppose, you know, in your mind's ear, that you build up a whole kind of library of things that have worked.